Okay, we are live at 5. It is Easter. He is risen. Hopefully, everybody's having a great Easter today. I celebrated by taking a little walk in the park, watching a church service online, so I get my get my church on, right? Because it's Easter. But this topic we're going to talk about today is very, very important to me as someone that actually has survived true clinical diagnosed narcissism from somebody. It's very, very important to me because I think this term gets thrown out way too much. And before you start labeling everybody as one of these, we have to understand by doing that to someone that isn't actually a narcissist, we're devaluing the people that have actually survived this hellacious type of abuse. And if you haven't actually been through any true narcissistic abuse, you don't know what it is. I mean, it is literally debilitating at times and is frustrating, especially if you have children involved. A lot of my clients that are actually in narcissistic relationships, the co-parenting and the divorce proceeding stuff, it is absolutely a nightmare. It's not as simple as just, oh, they're self-centered. It's way deeper than that. And we're going to get into it because a lot of people, they see a narcissistic trait and they automatically think it just means they're a narcissist. Narcissist has to have a long checklist of stuff before we actually call them one, but there are tendencies where they use different tactics that can actually go across all sorts of personality types. It can go to just people who are not emotionally savvy, so to speak. They don't have a high emotional intelligence. They may come across as that way. And also, if anybody is on the Facebook side, tell me if my microphone is working. Last week, the microphone wasn't working. I don't want to keep going if the microphone isn't working on that side. So anybody comment so I can see that my microphone's working, and then we'll go ahead and get started. Also, these are going to be available only for on the Facebook side for about 24 hours, and then it's going to get posted to YouTube. Same thing here is that the live on Instagram is only going to be available live. After that, it will be posted sometime Monday onto my YouTube channel. The YouTube link will be posted to my story tomorrow. So if you want replays of these, you're only going to be able to go to YouTube because the way Facebook and Instagram are doing it, they're deleting any video that's longer than a certain amount of time. And these hour-long live at 5s go that long. So I'm going to have to end up deleting them off of here, and they're going to have to go to the other side. So, all right. So we got a thumbs up over here saying that we are working. So let's dive into this. So not everyone who hurts you is a narcissist, okay? We need to have discernment and understanding what the difference is and what other things can present as narcissism. Once we start seeing these things, it might be actually easier to pick out. Because once I tell you what some of these traits are and how they present as like a narcissistic person but aren't, you're going to be able to actually spot it easier in partners you've dated and be like, oh my gosh, they weren't a narcissist, they were just this. Okay? So we're going to dismantle this growing tendency that everybody has that as soon as they're hurt by someone or they're abandoned, they immediately think they've been discarded by a narcissist, right? So I'm going to encourage some critical thinking and really having a true, honest look at your own relationships. Don't just immediately assume, oh, they're a narcissist. Have the guts to truly look at it, because sometimes even it's us not wanting to face some bad ways that we've treated others, and their reaction and the way they're acting isn't actually narcissism. It's protection because we have treated them poorly as well. So let's just remember that going into this, that I want you to take an honest look at relationships you've had and not just make the assumption that everybody has a narcissistic personality disorder. What's even more interesting is I have a lot of clients come to me and they think they're dealing with a narcissistic personality disorder person, when in actuality they're dealing with somebody more like borderline personality disorder. And the two are actually kind of polar opposites. The narcissist has like zero emotions, empathy at all, none. But then you have the borderline personality, which is hallmarked by just emotional explosiveness, all over the map, inconsistent, lashing out. And a lot of times we think that because they are a certain way, oh, it's just a narcissist, when it's not actually the case. So please leave diagnosing someone as a narcissist to the professionals, right? I didn't even know the term existed until I went into therapy sessions with a girlfriend I was dating at the time. And the therapist actually was the one that told me that I think she's actually a narcissist. She's exhibiting almost all the classic signs of it, just the way her demeanor is inside of our sessions, because we did joint sessions for about 6 sessions to try to get past some things that her and I were dealing with. And I don't know why she agreed to it. I think she did it because she thought they would tell me I was the narcissist or I was wrong. But I have gone through it personally with an actual narcissist, and I help clients through this all the time, especially getting through the legal process and getting through custody and all the things that go along with that, guardian ad litem, all those things. So the power and the problem of labels. So when someone hurts you deeply, it's human to want to name it, right? It's human for us. When we say we're scared, we want to tell ourselves why we are scared of the dark. Why are we scared of this? Why are we scared of flying, right? Because by naming it, right, it helps us to feel like we're at least normal, okay? But we can't put people in a box. We cannot diagnose them, and it's kind of bad because by labeling someone as a narcissist, and that doesn't always mean that, right? They may just be an unhealed person, and it's unfair to them to label them that, because then at that point, once they do heal and they're not longer a narcissist, if we've gone around saying this person is too many times, we can damage their future dating reputation, right? And I know this sounds kind of like crazy, but at the same time, they deserve an honest shake. And if you can't diagnose them, it's really, that's like someone calling you a shoplifter just because they saw you do something that maybe looked like you were a shoplifter. We wouldn't want that on our record either, and that's what we're doing by calling someone a narcissist, especially because I've seen it in these women's Facebook groups. Who is this guy? Oh, he's a narcissist. Oh, he's a narcissist. We are actually cutting that person down and not understanding why we think they're a narcissist, okay? And that's literally labeling somebody something that can be damaging to them in the future in all sorts of aspects, whether it be getting hired at a job, romantically, friends, all sorts of things, when we don't have that ability to do that. And I find that more in women's like Facebook groups than I do anywhere else, but it is very, very dangerous in how we can damage a person just by labeling something when they're not, right? So it's a shortcut these days for the terms "they hurt me," right? Which is not right. So while naming real abuse is valid and necessary, the overuse of the term can distort healing. It invalidates and minimizes what people that have actually gone through that type of abuse, it minimizes what we've been through and tries to make yourself feel more important. And again, a lot of times when I find people saying these things, it's because they don't actually want to look at themselves and look at their behaviors, okay? We're not getting into that today about how that happens. We're just going to get into how narcissists can look, or how different manipulative or unhealed trauma can look like a narcissistic personality disorder. So sometimes calling someone a narcissist becomes a shield from our own reflection. That's what I was just talking about. And if they were a narcissist, then I don't have to ask what I ignored, what I enabled, where I contributed, how I treated them poorly. We don't have to do that. So it's very, very easy for a lot of people to they just don't want to deal with it, right? So what is narcissism really? Okay, it's a clinical diagnosis. They say that less than 1% of the population has narcissism, right? I believe it's more than that, because that's based on how many people have been clinically diagnosed and documented. And the problem is that you'll very rarely get a narcissist to go into therapy in order to actually become diagnosed, okay? They feel so grandiose, they feel so in power that they know better, so that there's no reason they would even need to go to therapy. Now, there's sometimes, like in my case, that I believe she did it because she thought that therapist was going to label me as the narcissist. She thought the therapist was going to tell her that she was right and I was wrong. That was actually not the case at all. She displayed zero lack of empathy in there, okay? So the clinical diagnosis is characterized by grandiosity or exaggerated self-importance. They think they're so important, they are entitled to you doing things for them. They are entitled to be able to tell you whatever they want about you and cut you down 100%, right? So it's very important we understand that it comes from a place of wanting to be very, very high, right? And you'll see in a minute here why that is there in the first place. It's kind of a defense mechanism to hide other things. The next thing we have is a lack of empathy. They talk about the childhood wounds that cause narcissism. Narcissism cannot, and there's some disagreement among psychologists, but Dr. Ramadi talks about this, that narcissism is actually rooted in childhood wounds, because a personality based on psychology comes from the ages of, I think it's like 2 or 3 to like 5 or 8, somewhere around there. So by the time they're 8, 9 years old, their personality disorder is already locked in. That is their personality. That's when it's formed in the mind, right? Things can change a little bit here and there, but their personality disorder will actually be locked in during those ages. Okay, so they get locked into their childhood emotions. A lot of times, people that describe true clinical narcissism, we're going to describe it a lot of times as being like, they're like, I'm going to take my ball and go home. They act very immature with their emotions. They lack empathy. They lack the ability to actually name different emotions. A lot of times, they're just mad, sad, hurt, frustrated, but they don't go much deeper than that. Okay, they have a lack of empathy and ability to see how they have hurt you, see your feelings, how things affect you in any way, shape, or form. Right? They have a need for constant validation. Right? They need compliments. When you don't compliment them, they'll use all sorts of tactics to get to you. But they need that constant validation. That's what helps keep them up. That's what props them up. Right? Because it's also hallmarked by a deeply rooted insecurity that is masked by that superiority. So that's why they have this grandiose, personality. They are actually extremely self-conscious. They have very, very little confidence. And the way they get around that is to puff out their chest, essentially, and act like they're more important than they actually are. Okay? They are hallmarked by exploitive or manipulative behaviors. That can be gaslighting. It can be outright control, triangulation. There's a various multitude that it can be, but very manipulative and controlling type behaviors. All right. They have an emotional detachment or contempt. Okay. True narcissists typically do not change because they don't believe they're the problem. They genuinely believe that everything else is the problem. Now, in all the research I've done on narcissism, what ends up really happening here is that the childhood abuse, whatever it was that caused the narcissism, was so bad that it fractures their mind to where anytime something hurts them, it's like their brain forgets what happened to it. I always say that a narcissist, it's almost like they forget the first 5 chapters of the book, and they're getting the story from chapter 6 on where they were hurt. But what they're not telling you is all the stuff that happened before it. So one of the things, there's a huge detachment and like holes in the brain where they don't remember how they abused you. All they can see is that you're hurting them with your actions. That's why when you're at you set a boundary with a narcissist, it's like, oh my gosh, you're hurting me. I'm the victim here. You're doing all these bad things to me, when it's really, they don't see why you had to set that boundary in the first place. Okay. So all of those things are what really bring it down to. And again, it takes an actual therapist, an actual clinical psychologist, right? And it typically, I say, you're going to want to find one that is very well versed on cluster B of personality disorders, because if not, they may not know some of the subtle nuances and the differences in between things, right? I have tons of therapists I've talked to in the past that just don't understand much about it because it isn't well researched. Right? Because again, with only 1% of the population having it, it's not somewhere that a lot of people want to get into. They don't want to dive deep into it. There's not necessarily as much money in that area, especially because narcissists don't like present themselves, hey, I need to get help for this, whereas depressed people want help. So a lot of people don't know a whole lot about it, right? So again, 1% of the population. I believe it's probably closer to anywhere between 5 and 10, but that's just me, based on what I know about narcissism. The one other way that a narcissist will go to a therapist is if they are court ordered to do so. They'll do it, and they typically will be very aloof about it. They won't give accurate data when they go. They'll lie. They'll do all those things, but they will go if a court orders them to. But even then, a lot of times they buck it. They try to put in all sorts of other court orders to stop them from having to do it. Because one of the things that narcissists hate the most in a legal battle, whether it be custody or anything, they don't want to be exposed. So one of the things we have to do during that litigation, all that stuff, is to literally put the pressure on them and be on the offensive. We cannot run defense on a narcissist because they see that as a way to exploit us. They see that as a weakness, and then they're going to continue to do it. Meaning, if they've been doing gaslighting behavior and it works to where you back off of something, then they're going to see that as, now I need to do it 10 times as much because I can get them to back off more. So we have to be a little more on the offensive with them. Okay. So why does this term get misused so much then? If those are the things that cause it to be, or those are the qualities of a narcissist, and you can see how some of those can be applied to anybody, why do people do that? Well, it gets applied to people that set a boundary, that fail to validate us, that disappoint us, that abandon us, that cheat on us. We immediately think that they cheated because they're so full of themselves. It's really not what's going on. Misuse keeps us in the black and white thinking that they're evil, I'm good. narcissism is actually a scale. Okay, when they do the narcissism test, I think if I remember correctly, the number is 14. When you take the test, if you get a 14 to 17, you have narcissistic tendencies. If you cross 17, then you're actually a narcissist. And the higher you go, they have like a thing that they have online somewhere. If you look, they say from 17 to 20 is like what typical politicians and actors are. And then when you get past that, then you get into like this almost psychopaths, right? Like psychopathy is a really very real thing that actually narcissists can end up in later on in life sometimes. Okay. So it limits healing by placing all the focus on them and none on us. One of the things that happens with people that have been in narcissistic abuse, they end up in it again, or they end up in another abusive relationship very shortly thereafter. And why does that happen? Because we have now labeled them as a narcissist. We fail to look at where we made mistakes, right? Again, how did I treat them poorly? It doesn't mean that the abuse didn't happen. And we're afraid to say that I had a hand in this. One of the biggest ways we can validate that trauma happened, because by not admitting that I did something wrong, I'm admitting that the abuse was all on them. I'm waiting for them to validate the abuse happened. Problem is with a narcissist, they will never, ever, 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 ever validate your trauma. They're never going to do it. So because of that, we sit there waiting for them to validate that it happened to be able to heal from it. So it blocks us from doing our healing, because the healing portion of it is, where did I enable it? How did I stay too long? When should I have left? How could I have noticed this sooner? Because when we talk about trusting new people in the future, the problem isn't that we don't trust new people. It's that we don't trust ourselves to recognize these things early. So as we do our work before we get in another relationship, we realize where we didn't see the red flags early enough and where we went wrong, so we don't make the same mistake. Because the problem is that life is going to throw at us people that we can't trust. We have to discern whether or not we are giving them our trust and whether they are trustworthy. The problem that happens with a narcissist is that we gave them our trust, so now we think that we can't trust them anymore, when it's really we shouldn't have trusted them in the first place, if that makes sense. So it does really limit our healing. It limits our ability to be able to examine what went wrong with us and grow ourselves, so we don't end up in that position again. Okay. So now we're going to shift into the ways and the type of people that we could be dealing with that are not narcissists but can present as narcissists. Okay. There's 6 common root causes of manipulation or hurtful behavior, which then comes out as that. So when we talk about the concept of, a lack of empathy, that may not be the case. I have a little it's a graphic that if anybody needs it after this, let me know. I'll send you the graphic. But it's a little chart, so to speak, that shows different behaviors, how it presents in a narcissist, and how it can present in other people as well. It's a very good tool for trying to determine whether or not somebody is an actual narcissist. But the first one of these 6 common root causes is unhealed trauma. Trauma survivors may lie, shut down, manipulate, or act out in attempts to regain safety. If they feel unsafe in a situation, they're going to do a lot of the things that look very, very similar. The problem is that the intent behind it is defensiveness, not control. They are not looking to be malicious. They are looking to literally protect themselves from what they believe is a threat from you, because your behavior may look similar to the way a narcissist has acted in the past. Or, for example, they're afraid to show emotions a lot of times, because every time they've shown emotion in another case, right, they got shut down, they got hurt, they got abused, they got manipulated, they got gaslit, whatever it is that caused them to shut down. They're going to do it with you as soon as they have to say that, or any emotion, because that's what they're used to. That's what they've been conditioned to. All right. So somebody that is an unhealed trauma may make it look just like they are a narcissist, because they are going to stonewall you a lot of times. Unhealed trauma typically is a liar a lot of times when they have unhealed trauma, because they're afraid to tell you the truth, right? Which then once we figure out they're lying, we're like, oh, they're a narcissist, they're lying. Again, not always the case, right? So we have to be careful this one. So some example, or a example of this, right? Someone hides finances or makes controlling decisions, not to dominate, but because their childhood was so chaotic and financial control feels like survival. Like they're not trying to win. They're trying, they're trying not to drown, essentially, is what they're doing, right? So if we feel like we're out of control, a lot of times we try to control one area that we feel we can control. And with somebody that's unhealed, it may look like they're being a narcissist when they're trying to control finances when you're in like a marriage with them, when in actuality it's the only thing that they feel like they're in control of. And sometimes, and a lot of times, these behaviors come and go. And narcissist, it will never come and go. It is always on, always there, 100%. If you have someone that kind of looks like a narcissist 1 minute and then doesn't the next minute, a lot of times it's unhealed trauma. It's the fact that they only feel like, so if I'm having a bad day at work, and I'm having a fight with my parents about, them coming to visit for Thanksgiving or whatever the case may be, I may feel like I'm out of control of my life, and then I start looking like I'm very in control of my spouse or my partner because I'm trying to control the only thing I feel like I can control because everything else is out of control. And that happens a lot of times when there's unhealed trauma and a lack of confidence. Because again, narcissism is actually a lack of confidence. So a lot of the same behaviors in other people that come from a lack of confidence are going to make them look like they are a narcissist when they are in fact not. All right. And unhealed trauma, one of the first things it does is it erodes any self-confidence that we have in ourselves. That's why that unhealed trauma typically causes us to feel like we are not worthy, to feel like we are empty, to feel like we're not good enough for someone, that we don't deserve love, and things of that nature. So we have to understand where the root of that is, which is the unhealed trauma. Okay, the next one of the 6, so the first one is unhealed trauma. The next one is emotional maturity, right? If somebody lacks the skills to be able to communicate, regulate, handle conflict, express vulnerability, they're going to react with blame, deflection, silence, or outbursts, okay? And again, this is one of those things where it's not all or nothing. Depending on whether or not they feel threatened, they may be this way. They may know how to regulate certain emotions, but not other emotions. They may now know how to handle conflict in certain situations, but not others. So it's not an all or nothing with these, okay? So that emotional maturity means that they just don't have the ability, or they lack the awareness to be able to even speak on it. When somebody doesn't have the emotional vocabulary to say, hey, you're hurting me and here is why, they're not going to speak up to you. And then it will look like they're stonewalling you. You're going to be like, oh man, they ghosted me or whatever, right? When someone ghosts, it does not mean that they are stonewalling. A lot of times they don't have the courage to be able to face whatever it is. And what's interesting is that lack of courage is saying that they are in extreme fear, which, in all honesty, I don't think narcissists really feel fear. They'll go into the craziest. They'll chop their arm off if it means it's going to control you or hurt you. They have no fear in a lot of situations. Again, coming from a lack of emotions. Okay, so when let's say I'm in a relationship and I have unhealed trauma or I'm emotionally immature and I stonewall and I don't talk to them, again, we have to look at what the intent behind it is. If the intent was to protect themselves, they are not a narcissist. If their intent was to create a malicious thing in you or make you hurt, overthink, or punish you, then yes, it is. And very few of us are capable of diagnosing whether or not someone is doing it from one intent to the other. All right. That's why I say leave it to the experts. Okay. Let them determine that this person is truly a narcissist at that point. Okay. Now, what's the next one? So number 1 was unhealed trauma. Number 2, emotional immaturity. Number 3 is insecurity or shame. People that, and again, this looks similar to the unhealed trauma, right? Because when you have unhealed trauma, a lot of times we have this I have no worth kind of thing, right? So when people feel not enough, they overcompensate with arrogance or deflect with shame onto others, right? They project where their shortcomings are. Projection is a very, very good way to look like a narcissist, right? To shame other people for the very things you're doing, because narcissists do that all the time. They typically, a lot of times, they are the kings of doing it. They'll literally tell a judge, oh, she's doing this, this, and this. And you can look at the evidence and clearly see they're the one doing it. And the spouse that they're getting mad at actually isn't. So that insecurity is typically going to come out as a very, very deep projection of what their own insecurities are. Okay. And that comes from feeling not enough. But again, intent behind it. The person that is insecure is doing it so that way, they're trying to keep you from whatever shame or pain they have inside. Whereas the narcissist is doing it to exert control. They are trying to dysregulate. One of the big hallmark signs, I believe, of narcissism is trying to dysregulate their people that they are in a narcissistic abuse relationship with in order to control them. By keeping you dysregulated, you're going to make bad decisions. They're going to be able to distort your reality much, much easier. So they do those things like stonewalling. They do those things like arrogance because it dysregulates you and they know it. Right. Which then that's why we typically tell people with an arrogant or a narcissist, the quickest way to get out of it, start to gray rock and not give them anything to allow them, because they know how to react to you if you're positive. They know how to react to you if you're negative. If you agree or disagree, they know how to react. When you gray rock and you don't show any disagreement or agreement, they don't know how to handle it. So a lot of times I tell people the best way to get away from a narcissist is don't act like anything works you up. Don't act dysregulated. Act like that's exactly the way the play was supposed to happen. That's exactly how the plan was supposed to go. No matter how bad it is, no matter how dysregulated on the inside you are, if you don't show them that you're dysregulated, they'll back off of it because they see it's not dysregulating you. So if it's not dysregulating, not bothering you, they'll move on to another tactic. Problem is that they tactic shift. They bounce from tactic to tactic trying to do these things to you. So that's where I say that insecurity and that shame gets projected, and they try to hurt you as a way to make themselves feel better, because projection is a way of shaming someone else for the very things that I'm doing. We're trying to shame ourselves through that other person, okay? The next one I'll say is learn patterns, okay? So people who grew up around manipulation, stonewalling, or emotional control may mirror what they were taught. It's conditioning, not necessarily personality disorder. So some of these things, if they grew up with a narcissist, they may become one, because the mirroring of these learned behaviors plus whatever abuse they went through can make it that way. But some people literally just think it's okay when they're mad to just not talk to their partner. And when you talk to them, they will tell you that it came from a childhood, wound or whatever. So one of the things here to learn if this is a childhood behavior pattern or whether or not this is something a little deeper is to get inquisitive with the person. So if somebody's doing that to you, right, they're stonewalling you, or they're trying to emotionally control you, you can ask them questions like, have you always been this way? Or why do you think that is okay? Somebody that is a narcissist will not even engage with you if you ask them a question. Somebody that is a narcissist will not want to, they'll basically blame shift, they'll go somewhere else with it. But someone that truly does have some empathy, they'll be like, well, I don't know. I mean, my parents did it that way. And that right there is a sign that person is probably not a narcissist, because by asking the question, we are placing some blame on them, and the fact that they're now willing and able to be able to look back through their childhood or whatever it may be to where that behavior started shows that they're not a narcissist. A narcissist wouldn't even entertain the idea that they're even wrong of anything. So they'll immediately shut down the conversation, or they'll take your attention elsewhere into something else. Well, you do it too, kind of thing, right? So it's very, very important for us to understand that we have to really get inquisitive with some of these too. And again, if we've already been in narcissistic abuse, okay, and we're afraid we're going to have it happen again, being able to recognize these patterns early is best. So if we recognize that we think someone is being this way with us, the best thing we can do is get inquisitive, look at what their response is, and if their response does not line up with what I'm talking about here, we walk away. But that's where we have a problem for a lot of us that have been in that abusive relationship, because we didn't do the work on ourselves to recognize these behavior patterns, to see where I went wrong. Because if I did, I would see that, oh, when they did this and I didn't ask any questions, I just immediately assumed this, then we stayed longer than we should have, okay? So that learned patterns, those learned behavior patterns, right? It's conditioning. It's not necessarily part of their behavior, okay? We also have to remember that all behaviors, I don't care if it's part of your personality or not, all behaviors are a learned behavior, okay? They can be learned by anyone and they can be unlearned by anyone, which means it's a choice to be able to unlearn bad behavior patterns. So a narcissist who does not want to admit they're wrong, which is typically the first step in fixing any problem, is admitting there's a problem, they're never going to change. They're never going to change at all. So if it's a learned behavior, and they actually care about you, they're going to do something to try to fix that issue. And if they start doing any work to try to fix themselves, I promise you they are not a narcissist. Even if they fail at that attempt and they continue to try, I guarantee you they're not a narcissist. Because again, a narcissist will never admit that they are wrong. They will never admit they are part of the problem. If they did do anything wrong, it's because you made them do it. So they wouldn't have done it had you not done this. Okay. Yes, we are all responsible for our behaviors and whatnot, but we do have to understand our words and actions do have consequences, but they take it to the extreme where they make you completely responsible for everything that they do, 100%. Okay, so just a little bit of inquisitive nature, we can get to the bottom of it. Right. So what's the last one, the next one, the number 5? That's a lack of communication skills. Someone that does not or has not ever done the work to understand how to communicate properly, to say statements like "I feel" instead of saying something like "you did this," right? If they have not gone through that process of doing what they call emotional wheel and learning what the different 6 core emotions are, what all the subsets are, and they can't communicate that to you, it may look like they're a narcissist, because what they're going to end up doing is they're going to lash out at you because they don't know how to communicate. Typically, most people that do not know how to express what they're feeling do one of 2 things. They lash out or they back away. So they're going to either stonewall or they're going to get angry, an angry outburst at you. But that does not mean that they are actually a narcissist. What it means is that they have an inability to have conflict management, and they have an inability to communicate what they're feeling in real time. Now, some things that I can tell you that from experience, that if someone is presenting like that, I typically tell them, tell your partner, take 24 hours, think about it, and then let's come back to it. If somebody started getting overly, crazy, or if they take that 24 hours because they stonewall you and they come back to you and they have a pretty good idea of what's going on, they can express themselves, they're probably not a narcissist. Typically, a narcissist will stonewall you until you apologize for whatever you did that hurt them. All right. So just remember that just because they went and stonewalled you does not mean that they are a narcissist. Because a lot of times what they'll do is they'll come back around and they'll have time to process it. So a lack of communication skills doesn't mean necessarily that they can't communicate at all, but it may mean that they have to take time to do that. So then they're going to stonewall you for 24 hours, and they're going to be like, oh my gosh, he's a narcissist. He's doing it for the intent behind it. Their intent behind it is to be able to collect their thoughts. Some people cannot process as fast in the moment of what's going on, or they may be dysregulated and their nervous system is causing them to not be able to process information right. So just because they stonewall does not mean they're a narcissist, but how they react afterwards will be a telling tale. If they go 4 or 5 days and then just act like it never happened, then it's closer to being one. But if they come back after 24 hours, be like, look, I've had a lot of time to think about what you said, and it really upset me in the moment, but now I kind of understand why. I promise you that person is probably not a narcissist, because they're showing the ability to have self-reflection, which a lot of narcissists won't do because, again, they don't think they're the problem. They don't think they should have to do any reflection because they don't think they did anything wrong. Even if they did something wrong, it was you that made them do it. Makes sense? So we got to be really careful there, okay? When a lack of communication it goes awry, essentially, right? A friend who dismisses your feelings may be emotionally illiterate and not emotionally abusive, right? They may not even know they're doing it. A big one I see a lot of times is if I'm in a relationship with a narcissist, or a potential narcissist, we'll say, and I come to them and I say, my feelings are hurt. I feel super sad that you didn't show up for me at this time. Okay. And if they immediately get defensive, it's going to look like narcissism, like they defend themselves to high heaven with everything they do. However, their defensiveness may come out of unhealed trauma. They may feel a need to, because like in past relationships, they may have the behavior pattern that every time their partner brought up their feelings, they got abandoned shortly thereafter. And it was like that breakup cycle of break up, get back together, break up, get back together. So what we see in them being defensive may not be narcissism. It could be unhealed trauma that they don't know how to communicate what's going on, so they just do what they do, okay? So we have to be very, very cognizant of these things if we're trying to determine what kind of person we are actually with, okay? And the number 6 core trait is a fear of intimacy, right? A lot of times a person will present looking like a narcissist, and what is actually going on is they're a fearful avoidant, right? They avoid the emotions. They avoid those things. And they can look very, very similar. So we have to be very, very careful in this, because somebody that fears vulnerable has been hurt in the past. Again, unhealed trauma. They've been hurt in the past whenever they got vulnerable, whenever they got intimate. So there's a disconnection. Even during, sex, they may feel completely disconnected. They may love you. They may tell you they love you. But during sex, it feels very disconnected. And that's because they see that as a vulnerability. They don't want to have any emotions there. Right? So some people will even sabotage their connection when they feel like that person is getting too close, right? And this is where the avoidant will typically kind of distance themselves for a few days and then just claim things like, oh, I just got so wrapped up in work, I'm so sorry. What they were actually doing was pulling themselves out of the relationship because it got too close. We were too intimate. It was too much for us, so we back away. That's what the fearful avoidant typically does, okay? Now, narcissistic traits versus narcissistic personality disorder. This is what I have to understand, is that there are traits that are on that make up a narcissist, but that doesn't mean that they are. A lot of people think that because they've been gaslit, they are immediately, oh, it's a narcissist. There are various personality disorders that all use gaslighting. Not to mention, some people do it because they're unable themselves to deal with whatever it is that they've done wrong, so that they try to come up with this crazy story to lie to you, to make you feel better about something, to stop you. That does not make them a narcissist. It makes them manipulative, but it does not make them a narcissist, right? So we all have narcissistic traits at some point in time, and these are wanting to be right. We all want to be right. A lot of us don't want to be wrong, because if we're wrong, we have to examine why we came up with that and how we feel inferior, stupid, unworthy, not smart, whatever words you want to use there. So we want to be right, so we'll argue a point. That doesn't make them a narcissist, but it may look that way because a narcissist does have to always be right. Okay? Struggling to apologize. Some people just don't know what the 4 parts of an apology are, or how to formulate it, or how to even express it. Or they feel uncomfortable. They've never had to. They and their family growing up, no one ever apologized. You just acted like it didn't happen. You just forgave without having to say anything. So they may not know how to apologize, but that does not mean that they are a narcissist. That doesn't mean that they lack empathy. They just may not know how to apologize, right? And sometimes the key is in how they apologize more than whether or not they can. Like if somebody apologizes and they use words like, I'm sorry you feel that way, they are deflecting all blame for your emotions on you, right? They're deflecting everything on you. They're not saying, I'm sorry I made you feel that way, or I'm sorry I did that and it made you feel that way. And that's the key. Someone that just says, I'm sorry, does not make them a narcissist. We'd have to have more information on the intent behind it, right? And narcissists will usually deflect it, and that's why I say a lot of times they'll apologize to at least smooth things over, but they'll do it in a way that completely backhand comments you. I'm sorry you feel that way, right? They're not actually sorry of anything, right? Because a sorry requires you to understand the problem that hurt them and be able to demonstrate that, and it requires us to have empathy for how it made them feel. We have to be able to ask for forgiveness and give them what we're going to do in the future to stop that from happening. Narcissists will never do that because they're not going to change their behavior. They don't feel like if you're hurt, it's your own fault for feeling that way. That's essentially what they do, which some people do that. People that do not have a whole lot of self-awareness for their emotions, or they are a person that typically tries to regulate their emotions all themselves, they're going to tell you you're responsible for your emotions completely. It happens all the time. Right? Another narcissistic trait is seeking validation. Just because someone goes online and tries to get likes and comments and follows and shares does not mean that they're even seeking validation. And even if they are, doesn't mean that they're necessarily a narcissist. Typically, more often than not, narcissists have a target that they want the bulk of their attention from. And when they don't get it from them, they'll appear to friends and family as like the greatest person on earth. That's why narcissists are so hard to spot, because the vast majority of people feel like, oh my gosh, they're the most charming person. How could you not like that guy? When behind closed doors, they're not that way. So they can seek validation in that way, but they typically have one person that they really want their validation from. And they discard them, at times. Another way is acting self-centered when overwhelmed, right? Trying to immediately place you as the blame for all of their behaviors. That's not a trait of a narcissist that we don't see elsewhere. There are tons of people that exhibit that behavior. When we're hurt, right, or when we're overwhelmed, we'll typically make everything everybody else's fault, because now not only am I hurt, I have to reanalyze my entire world, so to speak, around how did this happen? How did I get stuck in this? Why do I feel this way? Okay. So we don't want to face it. So we're going to act very self-centered. We're going to make everybody else the problem in a short term because we can't mentally cope with what's going on, right? Now, what's the difference in this? So you can have traits. You can have all of these traits at the same time. What is the difference? And this is where I talk about narcissism is on all the time, period. It never goes away. Like, you can wake them up from sleep and they're going to be that way. Right before bed, they're that way. Drinking, they're that way. Not drinking. Hungry, not hungry. It does not matter what situation you find yourself in, they're going to be that way, right? So the difference in traits and disorder is pattern, okay? Is it chronic or pervasive? If it's chronic and it is all the time, they are a narcissist. If it is something that happens from time to time, depending on situations, right, it's not necessarily, it's going to be a narcissistic trait, which could be signaling one of the other six. They may be fearing that intimacy. They may be having unhealed trauma, whatever it may be. Okay. The next one I say is intent. So the first one was pattern. The next one is intent. Is it rooted in power and entitlement, or is it rooted in defense? If they're doing it as defense of themselves, they could have a lot of things going on behind it. But if it's like because they want to exert power and dysregulate you, then yes, absolutely. So we have to look at what the intent is behind something. It's not easy to do. It's not easy to just say, oh, this is the intent. But if we look for little clues, we'll see them. Again, if somebody apologizes and says, I'm sorry, I made you feel that way, they're showing empathy, or at least that they can understand that they did something wrong. Which, again, it's that little thing that shows the intent, right? The last one I'll say is empathy. Can they acknowledge your pain? Just by them saying, I can understand how I hurt you, even if they don't apologize, I promise you they're probably not. A narcissist would never utter a phrase like that. So again, if they utter a phrase like, I can see how I made you feel that way, and I'm sorry for that, but they don't do anything else on that apology, I promise you they're probably not a narcissist, because they're not going to, they wouldn't even admit that they even hurt you. They typically, if they're going to say anything, you'd be like, well, if you're hurting, it's your fault. You made me treat you that way. You made me yell at you. You made me do this. Make me do anything. Right? But a lot of times that's where it comes down to, is they're going to tell you you made them. Right? There's a difference. Again, you're going to have some people be like, well, because you did this, this is how I acted. And that's okay. They're still owning, they're not saying that you are, you held a gun to their head with the way they behave, but that's the way a narcissist sees it. So a narcissist is going to be like, you made me do it. Whereas somebody that has unhealed trauma may sound more like, I did that because you did this. And then they're going to tell you why, because I was scared of this. I was scared you were going to abandon me. Well, now it makes sense. It doesn't look as narcissistic at that point, right? So I have this comparison table. It's got a behavior, what narcissism looks like, and what emotionally mature and unhealed looks like. And again, if you want this table, let me know. But I use it as a check-in to see, right? So the very first behavior is ignoring your feelings. What it looks like as a narcissist is they feel entitled to be able to ignore you whenever they want. Whereas an emotionally mature person, they don't know how to respond. They don't know what to say to something. It makes them feel uncomfortable. I'm sure we've all been in scenarios at some point in time in our life where we've said something to somebody and they're not even sure what to do with it. And they don't even respond. But that doesn't make them a narcissist. That just means that they don't know how to respond to it. They may not have the words, right? So we have to understand that just because they ignore your feelings does not make them a narcissist. Right? The next behavior, gaslighting. What a narcissist looks like, it's manipulating to control you. They want you dependent on them for your reality. You will make their reality. That's why they gaslight. So somebody who's emotionally immature, they're panicking and they're deflecting the shame that they feel for the behavior that they did that hurts you. So they will change details, do all sorts of stuff. But then again, it does not make them a narcissist. It's a narcissistic trait. If they're not doing this all the time, it does not mean that, okay? The next behavior is avoids accountability. As a narcissist, it's going to see it, they see themselves as perfect. So they don't need to take accountability for anything. right? An emotionally immature or unhealed person is going to struggle with guilt or shame, and that's why they don't want to take accountability, because they don't want to admit that they think they're a bad person. There's a difference, and I talk about this one a lot, is there's a difference between guilt and shame. Guilt says, I made a mistake, and that was bad. Shame says, I am bad. And a lot of times people avoid that accountability because they don't want to label themselves as bad. If I did that, and I did it on purpose, I am a bad person. They don't want to make that determination. So they steer clear of it, and they use another behavior, such as avoiding accountability. They'll typically, a lot of times, blame shift or deflect to some other topic to try to get off of it. The last behavior on my little table is makes it all about them, right? The narcissist craves admiration. They want you to tell them that they are amazing. They want you to do those things, okay? But when somebody's emotionally immature, they're craving validation. But again, craving validation is not the same, right? So if somebody is craving the admiration, they're wanting to be put on a pedestal. A person that craves validation just wants to be seen and heard. Okay, there is a big difference between the two of them. And understanding those two, it makes it a little bit easier to kind of see sometimes. So now, as we go back through that real quick, I want you to remember what we talked about at the beginning. I want you to, and anybody that says that I'm with a narcissist, I want you to imagine those people, go back through them and look at them. Did they have unhealed trauma? Is there emotional immaturity? Were there insecurity or shame? Is there a learned behavior pattern? Like, did I see their mother do that, or their father do that, or their brother do that? Do I see a lack of communication? Do they have communication issues in other areas of their life? Do they have a fear of intimacy, right? If I look at it from that lens and I use this comparison table, I start to see that a lot of these people are just wounded people. They're just unhealed from trauma that they went through, and now they're bleeding on other people, and that bleeding looks like narcissism. But a lot of times it's not. Narcissism is pretty brutal. For anyone that has suffered for more than a year or two with somebody, especially if you were married to them, anybody that's gone through about 2 years or more, I can promise you it upends your entire life. It's not as simple as just, oh, well, I can bounce back from this. Like, you get to some controlling people, it's one thing. You can bounce back in like 6 months, you can get over that person. Person that's been under narcissistic abuse will suffer for the rest of their life trying to get over some of the things that were said and done to them while in that relationship. So there is a difference, okay? So when we misuse the label, we are avoiding accountability in ourselves, right? Sometimes we call someone a narcissist because they mirrored our own wounds, and we see the behavior. So when we call out people's behaviors, a lot of times it's projection. We see the behaviors in them that we don't like because we know that we're doing the very same thing. So we have to understand that by labeling them a narcissist, a lot of times we're labeling ourselves the same way because we are doing the same thing. So we have to be very, very careful. And one of the things I tell people, as soon as they start calling someone a narcissist and they start labeling the behaviors, like, have you ever done that in this relationship? Do you find yourself ever doing that? And a lot of times they start saying yes to it, and they start realizing that this person is just an unhealed person. Especially if that person is a disorganized attachment style, they're going to look just like one, right? That push-pull dynamic that even narcissists have, right? Labeling them lets us avoid asking where we've dismissed, where we have been where we projected on them, where we disrespected them, right? And where we've hurt them too, okay? Number two reason why we misuse it is we oversimplify the dynamic. Every relationship is co-created. Every behavior in that relationship is co-created. Everything. I'm going to say that for the people in the back. Everything is co-created. If somebody gets angry, yes, their anger is about them, but you created that anger by doing something that they didn't like. Their anger, while being at least justified, does not justify the lashing out, doesn't justify how they treated you afterwards. However, you have to take accountability. I imagine it like this. If I've got a cup of coffee, right, and you knock into me, I spill coffee all over myself. Yeah, I'm the one carrying the coffee. That's my fault that I spilled it. But that doesn't mean that you're not responsible for how you knocked into me at that point. So we have to understand that everything that happens in a relationship is co-created. If they abused you and they abused you for 3 years, you stayed way too long. You enabled it because a lot of times you did say things that put them over the edge. But that doesn't mean that their abuse was warranted. It just means you should have learned to leave much, much sooner in it. So our own behavior patterns of staying in those situations
caused us to get abused later. And a lot of people don't like when they hear that, but that's the God's honest truth, is that that's what unlocks the people that have actually healed from narcissistic abuse, is realizing where I went wrong, staying in that relationship well beyond its expiration date. Once you realize that, then you start seeing where you did things to literally incite them to get them worse, to make them act differently. And a lot of our techniques, yeah, we get to a point where we're in survival mode, but we should be leaving before we end up in survival mode. So we have enabled their behavior by being dysregulated and showing it to them. The problem is that they present so nicely in the beginning that it's very hard to spot, and I get that. But we are complicit in our own abuse. Unless we're a child and we have this blind faith in our parents and we got abused by them, that's different. But adult abuse, we are completely complicit in staying when they have, the first time they hit you, the first time they did something that gaslit you, they are 100% responsible. Every time after that, you did not set a boundary and you did not leave when you should have. And we have to understand that that makes it easier for us to trust ourselves later when we can see where we went wrong, where we didn't set boundaries, because now we can set those boundaries in the future. Now we can ask the right questions in the future to spot these people so we can get away from them earlier. Okay. So again, oversimplifying that dynamic, right? This doesn't excuse the harm. I cannot say that enough. It doesn't mean that they are not responsible for the abuse that they put you through. But it does mean that I overextended and I resent them later because of it, right? Did I communicate clearly or expect them to just know? A lot of times we label people as bad because we didn't even communicate what we needed, and when they don't fill our needs, we tell them, oh, they're just a narcissist. They don't give a crap about me. They don't have any empathy. I never communicated to them in the first place what I needed, so I cannot expect them to know what's going on. So stop oversimplifying that dynamic. The number 3 reason why we do this, we stop growing. Labels can provide clarity, but overused, they become cages that limit growth, empathy, and relational wisdom. Like I was saying, a lot of times we fail to look at where we were in a bad behavior pattern in that relationship, because by labeling them the narcissist says, all right, fine, they're the narcissist. That's why it all happened. But again, we stop learning on where we should have set boundaries, how we could have seen this earlier, how we could have made this determination, a year into the relationship, how I could have been stronger in this aspect or that aspect. So that stopping the growth is one of the big reasons why because we just don't want to admit that we were any part of the problem, especially when we've been abused, because we want to believe that we didn't ever deserve that abuse. And I'm not saying that your behavior patterns that were bad ever made you deserve the abuse, but it did mean it's like if I'm gasoline and I saw the fire and I throw the gasoline in the fire anyways, like I'm still responsible for how big the flames get, right? If I see that fire now, when I see somebody that exhibits narcissistic traits, I don't even go near that fire, knowing that I could be the gasoline to it if I'm not careful. So then I back away. I want to be with somebody that is water on a fire and not gasoline on a fire. Okay. So how to respond to harmful behavior without those labels, right? So this is where I say one of the biggest ways coming out of a narcissistic or even a relationship that looks narcissistic is learning to set boundaries, right? Not on behavior. So if somebody does something wrong, set a boundary. If they cross that boundary once, relabel the boundary. If they cross it twice, out of the relationship. Done with it. Over it. Don't diagnose them. Don't try to say they're a narcissist. Just, I'm done with this relationship. It's easier to do that than it is to then try to sort through later who they are and why they did that to you as a narcissist. It's much easier to just not even deal with it. Right? I like to say, ask myself, what pattern do I see and what does it cost me if I allow that pattern to continue on? Okay. I don't defend or excuse their behavior. I just recognize what it is and respond accordingly. Right? You don't need a label to walk away from dysfunction. If dysfunction is dysfunction, just walk away. We don't need to be, well, they're borderline personality. Well, they're bipolar. If it is dysfunctional and it is costing you your peace, the biggest thing I can tell you is to just walk away. Right? I understand how hard it is. I mean, I dealt with, a narcissist for 2 years after the first time she hit me. It was a little under a year when she hit me the first time. But I stayed for 2 years afterwards. Okay. So I know how hard it is to walk away. I didn't suffer from a massive long relationship like some of you have. And it's terrible when you've been in that position that long, but you do not have to label them as any form of abuser to be able to walk away. It's hard. It's going to suck. You're going to have to really take an inward look at yourself. But in the long run, the faster you get off that train, the better. There's an old Chinese proverb thing that's like, when you realize you're on the wrong train, get off at the next stop, because the return trip gets more expensive the longer you wait. So the more you go down that rabbit hole with somebody, that the first time you think that they might be abusing you, the longer you go, the harder it is going to be to recover from, because it's going to take you longer, because the longer you go, the more deeply rooted those things and those phrases and those manipulation, how much deeper it's going to be rooted into your psyche, and it's going to be much harder to pry it out of you. So all I can say is, if you think you're suffering from it, get away. Don't try to rationalize through, well, this, well, that. Well, they're a good person. Don't even try it. Just get out and let time do its, and go no contact, and let time start to heal you. It's going to take time, and it's going to take actual intentional healing, right? And I see someone here said it's really hard when it's apparent. Oh, I absolutely can guarantee it is, but at the end of the day, I've coached quite a few people from having to actually cut off their own parents. And it is well worth it in the long run, because otherwise you're going to spend the rest of your life. I would rather regret pushing them away than regret that I didn't get to live my life because I kept going back to what was hurting me. So there comes a point where the pain of holding on is greater than the pain of letting go, and that's where you need to get to. And I know that's hard. And I know I can sit here and say, oh, you just do it. But at the end of the day, being a person that's stared down the barrel of a narcissistic abuse relationship, I can promise you I know how hard it is. Harder with a parent, probably even still. Guaranteed it probably is. But we still have to remember that we've got to walk away. There's nothing more that you can do, right? So again, everyone that hurts you is not a narcissist. Sometimes they're hurting. Sometimes they're unhealed. Sometimes they're just immature. Sometimes they're just not for you. And sometimes we participated more in it than we ever want to admit. And admitting where we participated in that by inciting people. Like, take, for example, someone like this whole murder case with the guy with the black guy that killed the white guy in the tent in the track meet, right? He had pulled the knife out and he said, touch me, see what happens. If we touch them, then we are just as complicit. And a lot of times what I find in these cases where people say they're a narcissist, the person, and they're actually not a narcissist, is that we poke them too much. We poke them and we push them to that level. Oh, fuck around, find out, right? That whole phrase. Then we actually do F around, and we do find out, and then we're mad later and we label them a narcissist, when in reality we poked them to that point. We have to come to the terms with and own that truth that we may have been just as bad and toxic for them as they were for us. And labeling them a narcissist does not let go of my own toxicity as a person. I have got to examine those things and truly understand whether or not I was toxic to them just as much. But that's all I got for you guys tonight on this one. Again, if you weren't in here earlier, we're going to be posting these. They'll be available on Facebook for 24 hours until I get it onto the YouTube channel. They will not be available for the Sunday Night Live at 5s for replay on here. So you're going to have to wait for the link. I'm going to put the link in the link tree that I have, but I also will post it every single Monday. I'll probably be posting a link to the YouTube channel on my story, so that way you guys can see it. But these will not be available for replays on Facebook or Instagram at 24 hours plus. Okay, so if you need to watch it again, it'll be on the YouTube channel, and we will go from there as we start to kind of build the YouTube channel as well. But that's all I got for you guys. Again, happy Easter. He is risen. Jesus is your one and true Savior. I promise you that. But other than that, hope you guys have a great rest of your weekend, and I'll catch you next Sunday. I'm not sure what topic we'll use, but I'll let you guys know throughout the week. Other than that, stay safe, keep the faith, never let them grind you down. Thanks, guys.